Hello, welcome back. We are in the middle of a series on how to do high quality real estate photography, and today we're going to be talking about HDR and how to deal with windows. Let's get into it. So this is the most common difficulty that people who talk about real estate photography and how to overcome real estate photography issues have to deal with, and that is windows. Windows, of course, are the source of the greatest amount of light contrast in a photographic environment, especially real estate. Light contrast, of course, I've got a video on that, and that is an understanding of the difference between the brightest and the darkest area within a photograph, and it's an extremely high amount of this light contrast. So in here, one side of my face is too dark, outside the window is too bright. How do we deal with that amount of difference? Now, oftentimes this amount of difference is actually greater than the dynamic range of the camera, meaning there's no single exposure that actually gives you an appropriate exposure for inside and outside. There are two ways of tackling this problem. The first one is going to be to shoot in manual, slightly underexposed, and then bring out your shadows in post-production. This does require shooting in RAW, and I do have a video on that. And I want you to see, shooting a picture inside of this room, what we can do with just one image in RAW. And so here we're looking at it. And what we're going to see here is that if you have a full-frame camera, you can actually be reasonably successful by shooting in RAW, underexposed, bring out the shadows, and expose for your highlights. That's going to give you a pretty nice dynamic range in the end result. Now, the classic way that people have solved this problem is by doing HDR or high dynamic range shooting. If you have an APS-C camera, I think this is going to be essential for you. If you have a full frame camera, I think it's worth experimenting how much range you can pull out of your camera to see if this is necessary. So in HDR shooting, we turn bracketing on in our camera, which is where it shoots pictures at multiple brightness levels. And then we merge these together in post-production. There are several softwares that can do this. Photomatix is a classic, but your Photoshop, your Lightroom, your Affinity Photo can all do an HDR merge, which is where we take the bracketed images, merge them together, and keep the highlights. This is called tone mapping. Now, the software itself is easy to run. You typically take the images, toss them into the software, hit go, create an HDR, and it spits it out. What's important for your purposes in the photography side is that we shoot these images accurately. Now, here's what I mean by that. You can shoot them in aperture priority mode, and that'll work just fine. And in that case, it will bracket the shutter speed. And we'll be shooting 4-second exposures at the long end on this, and that's totally appropriate and fine. But the thing that I think is important to keep in mind is that you try to shoot many images. If you have the option of 5, 7, or 9 bracketing, you are going to get more smooth gradation in your end tone mapped image than if you shot 3 images at 3 stops difference each. When you do that, you're stretching out the sides and you miss some of the middle, and you get a more cartoonish look. So if you're going to do HDR photography, which I think will be essential if you shoot with an APS-C camera, then you are going to want to shoot as many bracketed images as possible. Now, what if your camera only allows 3 shots in HDR or in a bracketed series? It just won't do 5, 7, or 9. Well, in that case, you manually bracket. In this case, what you do is you go to manual exposure, single shot, and you start very underexposed, shoot an image, change your shutter speed, 1 stop, shoot another image, and you do this for 7 or 9 photographs. Start at the bright end and work darker, or start at the dark end and work brighter. Both are totally appropriate. Now, if you are going to shoot multiple series, you're going to want to know in post-production which images actually begin and end a series. My favorite way of doing that is to take my camera and to waste an image. Before and after I start a series, I like to hold my fingers in front of the lens and block part of it so I see a ruined image, and that tells me I'm starting a new series when I take these images into post-production later on. That'll make it easy for me to grab the 7 I need, throw them into my software, and spit out an HDR image. So I want you to see the same room if we shoot 7 images, sorry, it's 5 images. If we shoot 5 images HDR inside of this room and what we can produce with this window. And so this is also a perfectly reasonable result. The only downside is there is the extra workflow of taking these images and actually doing our tone mapping process. Taking one image and bringing out your shadows in an underexposed image is much faster. But your process and your camera should dictate what you end up doing. So that's the process of doing HDR when working in an interior environment, and it is something you're going to need to do in order to deal with windows. As always, if this has been useful to you, I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you got something out of it, and I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe. It's free, you knew that, and I thank you so much for taking your time to watch. I'll see you next time.